Great to have you on. Do you want to give everybody a quick introduction to yourself and your business, HYCU?
Sure, Chris. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having us on. I'm Simon Taylor, the CEO and founder of HYCU. HYCU stands for Hybrid Cloud Uptime. And what we do is multi-cloud and SaaS data protection. We consider ourselves to be the world's #1 leader in SaaS data protection. In fact, we've got about 4,600 customers in 78 countries. And what we very simply do is we back up and recover customers' data across on-prem, public cloud, and SaaS apps. So think about your Salesforce, your Office 365, all those different places where you keep your data. That's what we protect for you. And we're located, of course, right here in Boston, 617.
Yeah, love that. And what was the problem that kind of first sparked the idea for the company?
Yeah, so just to give you a bit of backstory, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I started my first company when I was about 24 years old. Sold it when I was about, 27, started my second company, sold it to Citrix. And I, sold my prior company, and I was sort of sitting around, and I ended up meeting up with a guy named Goran Gorevsky, who's now my co-founder. And we got into this long argument about the world of data protection, backup, and recovery. And I said, why is it that nobody likes their backup? It always feels like, it's one of those, everybody needs it, nobody wants it kind of, requirements in technology. And he said, well, it's because nobody's really disrupted that space yet. And I said, well, why not? And he said, well, it's hard. You've got data in so many different places. You've got data growing so vast, across the whole world. But the biggest challenge is that we've got data in on-premises environments. So in your basement, we've got it in the cloud. We've got it in all these different SaaS services. And nobody's really figured out how to build one tool to rule them all. So what you end up having is a number of different backup products to support all those different environments. And I said, okay, that's the problem, right? The problem statement is too many backup products, right? At the end of the day, people don't want to have to use 5 or 6 different tools to back up 5 or 6 different use cases. So we set out to sort of change that, to become one sort of ubiquitous end-to-end ring to rule them all, kind of the Swiss Army knife of data protection. And that's really what we did.
Brilliant. Fantastic. And, when you reflect, are there any early bets, sacrifices that, have proved pivotal to the success of the business?
There's so many. I think we've gone through an enormous amount of change at HYCU over the years, and it's been phenomenal. We've raised about $140 million from Bain Capital, Acrew, Atlassian, Okta. Every time you do a fundraising round, there's an enormous amount of change. Every time you go through a new product launch, there's an enormous amount of change. But I think the thing that steps out for me when I think about the business, since our founding in April of 2018, was the moment when we realized that we had it wrong. Because when we originated the idea of the company, we sort of thought people probably have their data in, 10 or 12 different places. You think about it, you've got Google, Azure, AWS, you've got VMware, you've got Nutanix, you've got maybe some physical, you've got your data in Salesforce and Office 365. How wrong we were. So today, there are 30,000 different SaaS services, and the average company keeps their data in 200 different places. So not to get too technical here, but just really simply, it's not about the amount of data, it's about the fact that the data is in tons of different places. Well, we looked at that and we said, well, how the heck are we going to build, different products for 30,000 SaaS companies? That's sort of impossible. We've designed this beautiful platform. It works really well for the 10 things that we do. But, there's probably 200 different, applications and databases out there that need to be backed up. We need to give them that cyber resiliency, that protection. And, it was a really daunting moment because we sort of sat back and said, did we get this wrong? Did we build a platform that's not going to support what the world needs? And, that's when it sort of dawned on us that we needed to change the game. If we were going to fix this problem of data silo sprawl, of having your data in too many different places and having none of it backed up, we had to find a way to reach into those SaaS services, those different companies, and get all their data backed up without us having to spend equal amounts of time, money, and resources for each and every one. And, so we sort of, I spent about 6 months just sort of reflecting on this problem. And eventually we sort of sat down and said, well, what if we didn't have to do all the work? Like, what if we could kind of tear the top off of our platform, throw away some of the sort of paradigms that we were using, and instead let's invite the SaaS vendors, these companies, the Salesforces and the Microsofts and the iManages and the others. Why don't we say to them, hey, you can build on top of us. You can write to our platform, and let's offer a marketplace for data protection. And so this was sort of the hardest and the most pivotal shift in our company. And in fact, it's when we went from about 900 customers to 4,600, because all of a sudden there was so much more data to back up in so many different places, and customers just sort of calling us up and sort of saying, hey, you're the only ones that are doing this. How do I kind of get my hands on the technology?
Yeah, brilliant. And I was going to ask you, how does the product look today versus when you first started? But through that question, that answer, I think you you've just illustrated that it looks probably completely different to when you first started out, right?
Absolutely.
Cool. So, apart from trying to solve that issue, that problem, what's been the biggest challenge when it comes to building out the business?
It's always about getting the people right. At the end of the day, whether you're selling ice cream cones or data protection products or AI or anything else, the technology is consumed by, used by, cared for, and developed by human beings. So no surprise, I think, when you are starting businesses and you're raising money and you're growing and you're getting scale, I always like to tell the team that, it's the culture that will endure. Technology changes. Anybody can build anything. It changes all the time, and what we started with will not be where we end up. But what will always endure will be the culture of the company. And, as we started to look at, how do we hire people for different stages, we wanted to make sure we didn't lose our identity. And so one of the things we did is we came up with our core values. And these were not sort of like marketing values where, somebody called me up and said, hey, we came up with a cool thing to say. What we really did is we sort of took a look at, out of all of our HYCUers, which is what we call ourselves, who are the HYCUers that really are going the distance with us? Who are the HYCUers that really seem to be happy in their jobs, that seem like they're succeeding, that feel fulfilled with this position? And it should be irrespective of what the job is, whether it's, from the CEO all the way to the newbie who just joins from college and everybody in between. And, we sort of thought about 3 core values that made a true HYCUer. And it's authenticity, grit, empathy, better with AGE. And the authenticity piece for us was, people who are comfortable in their own skin. We're all a little bit weird. We're a little eccentric. We're not like every other company, nor should we be. And I think that's what makes us special. The people who shine here, no matter what their interests are, their hobbies are, what they sound like, where they're from, no matter what it is, as long as they are comfortable being their authentic selves and accepting other people for being their authentic self, that's number one. The second piece is grit. And, a very, very good friend of mine who's, been in the company for many, many years, originated this word. And I think it's so true. And of course, everyone talks about grit these days, but you cannot overlook it. You can't have a startup, a scale up, I would argue even a large business, if you don't have the grit to fulfill the job, get through the day, fight through those hard battles and do those things. And I think the last thing is empathy, so it's authenticity, grit, and empathy. And the empathy piece is really just can you put yourself in somebody else's shoes, whether it's a customer, whether it's a partner, whether it's a colleague, because at the end of the day, we're not marked and graded on the easy times when everybody's getting along and we're high-fiving. You're looked at and evaluated by your customers, your partners, when there is a problem, when there's a bug, when there's, a challenge with a hyperscaler, the cloud goes down, whatever it might be. People want to know that the people behind the technology, the people behind the data care about them and care about what's going on. And so we really believe that empathy is fundamental to the business. So those 3 things, authenticity, grit, empathy, I think helped us to kind of regained control of the narrative as we built that culture, and have helped us to sort of build the sort of incredible team of HYCUers that we have today.
Yeah, I love that. So, setting up the business back in 2018, April, you mentioned. Yeah. So, at what stage did you formulate those values then? What kind of time in terms of the timeline did you come to those?
No, that's a great question. Nobody's asked me that before. And I'm trying to remember exactly when it was, but it was before COVID. So that puts it 2018 to 2020. It was somewhere in there. And I would imagine it was probably about a year into it. Because, you know, a year or two into it, you start to go through that, probably the second year second or third year, is when you start to get a little bit of scale. I think we had about 100 customers, 200 customers. And, you know, you don't always hire correctly. You don't have every 100%. Nobody has 100% hit rate on hires, no matter what they tell you. And, you know, I think the important thing that we did is try to learn from our mistakes and try to say, hey, what can we do better? And I think that's when it sort of struck that there are qualities here that really do create sort of the culture for the company that we want. And also, you know, enable us to hire the folks who are going to thrive and prosper here at the business. So I think that was probably the time period.
Yeah. Okay. And I presume kind of now they're fully ingrained in the business, those values. You know, you hire against them. You know, people are benchmarked against them internally in terms of you know, performers and a HYCU, etc.
That's exactly right. And you know, somebody told me once early in my career that management is being a broken record. And I've never forgotten that. And I've always thought it was a very, very sharp observation because, you know, there are so many different inputs and outputs in a business and in leading a team, no matter what level you're at. But you have to make sure that the things that are pivotal to your business when you're running a startup or a scale-up company are reiterated and put into practice and institutionalized at every step. So, you know, whether it is, you know, a HYCU summit, which would be our kind of, you know, annual conference, whether it is, you know, when we are doing a leadership days or a QBR or anything like that, we will always bring up every single all hands meeting. We're going to bring up, you know, authenticity, grit, empathy. It's printed everywhere in the business. You know, we've got flags, banners, all those kinds of things. But I think where it's the most impactful is when you can illuminate or shine a light on an employee for having shown a particular value. And I love doing that. So when we do our sales kickoff, for example, we'll give out culture awards, but it's not a generic culture award, just sort of, hey, you're great. It's, hey, you know, you're the most, you are expressing your authenticity better than anyone else in the company. Your grit better than anyone else. Your empathy better than anybody else. And I've had people come to me and say, you know, well, I don't like all this kumbaya stuff. You know, this empathy thing. You know, people talk about how you don't need empathy anymore. You've got AI. You don't need emotion. And I'm always stunned by it, frankly. But what I usually say is, look, at the end of the day, I don't really want to live in a world without human beings, nor would I be able to because I'm a human. And so I think that, you know, humanity has to come first, no matter what we do. And I think that when we embrace that, you know, our customers appreciate it. So if you need a way to sort of monetize or quantify this beyond sort of what you're describing as a kumbaya moment, then you should think of it that way. That we've got a 91 NPS score, you know, one of the highest in our industry. And if you go through and you look at what people say about HYCU, a lot of times it's, I had to call them for a questions to the support team. And I had the best experience of any vendor I've ever had. And I think that's empathy.
Yeah, congrats. Like a plus 91 score on NPS is top tier. That's
all right. It's all right.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And in terms of funding, raising, etc. As you mentioned earlier, you know, you guys have raised significant funds across multiple rounds. So what advice would you pass on to other founders that are maybe looking to raise external capital themselves?
Boston is the best, and don't let anyone tell you different. You know, I think loud and proud, right? So I'll give sort of some fun advice, and then I can kind of get a little more tactical. But you know, a lot of people said to me, wouldn't it be easier if you lived on the West Coast? And again, going back to authenticity, it's not where I live. It's not me. Nothing against it. Love the West Coast. Love my investors from the West Coast. I actually think that, your ability to shine here in Boston is incredible. We've got the best access to talent because of the university feeder system. We are close to Europe, and people underestimate this, but as you grow a global business, about 40% of our overall business comes out of Europe. And I don't know how I would do that from the West Coast. We've got a team that can interact globally. We've got almost 400 people here at HYCU, and about half of them are spread out around the world. And I think Boston's an incredibly central hub to do that. And the reason I bring this up is I think people are sometimes shy about it. It's one of these, well, I'll go in and I'll tell them maybe I'll move there, but don't do that.
Yeah.
Loud and proud 617, you can do this, and you'll do it from Boston because it's the best place to be. Now, in terms of actual, fundraising and the dynamics and those kinds of things, I think, number one is, the CEO has to be the storyteller in chief. I think that you've got to make sure that your passion shines through. You'll figure out the numbers, you'll figure out how to quantify the investment. That's to some extent the easy part. It's a lot of work, but it's the easy part. The thing that I think really matters for investors is, that they're investing in you, they're investing in the team that you put together. And so they're going to want to see that you are a high integrity, incredibly hardworking, get it done, passionate person. And I think that, again, those values don't get talked about enough. I think a lot of times we love to focus on the shiny new toy, or, oh my gosh, did you see that the valuations in cybersecurity, where I sit, or an AI, are incredibly high? Well, yeah, that's true, right? But there are, 100,000 of those companies, and only a very, very small handful are going to get funded, let alone by a top tier investment house. And so I think, simple old school sandbox stuff, believe in yourself, be passionate about what you're doing, and lean into who you are. Because if you do that, the narrative is going to shine through and you're going to do a lot better.
Yeah, brilliant. And in terms of expansion overseas, you mentioned that about half of your team is based overseas. For anybody that's looking to expand overseas, are there any particular things that, key learns that you've kind of had in terms of expanding overseas that if you had your time again, you'd do differently?
So I would say this, focus is probably the most important thing as you scale up a company. And it can be very challenging because opportunism strikes, and what I mean by that is you're building a company and somebody calls you and says, hey, I've got a 7-figure deal in this country. All we have to do is add 5 people. When you're a small business and you're, I'm thinking back to when we first got going. Obviously now we've got almost 5,000 customers, but if you've got 100 customers or 10 customers and somebody calls you with a proposition like that, there's a part of you that's going to say, well, yes, I'm going to do that. And I think sometimes you do need to say yes. You can't say no to every opportunity, but the extent to which you can focus and the extent to which you can ensure that you are building in a programmatic way, it's going to make it a lot easier to scale, because what you don't want to be spread so thin that you have a real challenge.
Obviously mentioned about the positives about building in Boston. You come across very passionate about Boston as a great place to set up a business and grow a business. Have there been, over the years, any particular local mentors, meetups, resources that have been really beneficial to yourself personally?
Yeah, well, I'll certainly give a plug to an organization that's near and dear to my heart, which is YPO, the Young Presidents Organization, the New England chapter I'm a member of. And, I found YPO probably about 7 years ago. So sort of, younger-ish CEO who was, had just been funded by Bain Capital. And, what the nice thing about YPO is that they put you with a small group, we call it Forum, a small group of other CEOs and leaders. And we meet every single month. And, so you're learning, you're sharing insights, you're going really, really deep with these individuals. And they're all kind of going through some iteration of the problem set that you're working through yourself. And so I think that's been very, very powerful. I also think that Boston is a very unique city because it's one of the few capitals across all 50 states that is both the center of commerce and the center of finance, a center of politics. So if you look at, most cities and states, take New York, for example, you've got the capital very central, then you've got New York City, which is over here, the center of commerce. And so what I love about that is I think that it pushes the local government and the state government here in Massachusetts to create a lot of programs to really, really support our founders, support technology, support innovation. And so as a result of that, I think we get a lot of investment into sort of the IT cluster. Now, that said, I also think we can do a lot better, so that's all the good. The bad is I think that, we're a very decentralized tech community here in Boston. I think when you go to Silicon Valley, all you have to do is, walk into Palo Alto and into any coffee shop, and you're going to see 37 entrepreneurs sitting around with their laptops, banging away. And I think that's good and bad. But the good of it is that there is an enormous amount of kind of frenetic energy that is sort of surrounding, that location. And I think we have to do a better job of building that energy here in Boston. It's here, it's just a little widespread. And I'd love to see us do a better job of kind of bringing that together in order to make us all successful.
Yeah. And any ideas in terms of trying to help with that process of bringing things together more and trying to get it to rise to be more prevalent and more obvious, in terms of the community?
There's a lot of folks that are doing interesting things. I speak with Andrew Lau from Jellyfish sometimes, Nathan Spielberg, who's got an organization called 617. I think getting involved in organizations like YPO can really be helpful as well. But I think at the end of the day, one of the things we have to recognize in the tech space is what I think was recognized in the biotechnology space here in Massachusetts many years ago by Bobby Coughlin and the folks at MassBio, which was we have to share. We got to pool our resources. We got to share. We got to come together. We've got to make the time and not to sell each other goods, but because together we can make informed decisions and learn from each other, and we can be stronger. I think that's part one. I think the other piece is, we've got, I think we have too few tier one venture capital firms here in Massachusetts. I'd love to see the state do more to attract VC. I think there's an enormous amount of VC venture in New York and in San Francisco. There's not enough here. And so I think to some extent, you're putting more, just more weight on the founders to have to go out and raise that capital from a location that's not theirs. There is something to be said for going to meet with your VC over coffee, and, again, I was very, very fortunate. I feel very blessed. I've got two of the best venture capitalists in the world on my board, Enrique Salem and Teresa Gao, both of whom live in San Francisco, right? So Bay Area folks. And I feel myself, very, very fortunate to get to work with them and have that experience. But would it be great if we had, people of that caliber, on every corner here in Boston? You bet it would. So let's go and sort of make that happen.
Yeah, brilliant. Great advice there. And then reflecting a bit now, what's the best piece of advice you've received from another founder over the years?
Yeah, well, I'll give you one around around working and finding board members and investors that I found really, really valuable. A very, very sharp venture capitalist said to me at some point, he said, "Simon, what we're really looking for is somebody that when the what hits the fan at Friday at 11 p.m. and the phone rings and it's the founder, you actually want to answer the phone." And he said, so really, just understand that a big part of this in the very early stages, not later on, as you develop a company and you've got your metrics and you've got your revenue and you're growing, but I'm talking pre-revenue. You want to make sure that, there's a no asshole factor in your money raising. I think you really need to make sure that you're the kind of person people want to work with. I think that's really, really key. I think the second thing is a piece of advice that, I actually a very close mentor here in Boston, who will remain nameless, but an incredible human being. They said to me at some point, presentation is everything, and I love that. I love that line. I use it all the time. And it's not to say that you disguise flaws. There's something nefarious about it. It just simply means if you can't tell the story, right? If you can't go in with a beginning, a middle, and an end, it's very hard to achieve anything in the world of entrepreneurship. Because if people can't understand what you're trying to communicate, the value of what you've built, the value of the passion that you've got behind the technology, the people behind the data, the why, the how, all of that comes down to presentation. And I think that, people should spend more time thinking through the story, that this storyline, and I don't mean a fictional story, I mean a real story around what they're doing, so that they, in the early, especially in the early stages, so that they can get that value out there.
Yeah. And as a serial entrepreneur, there's obviously going to have been lots of highs, lots of lows over the years. How do you personally navigate that? How do you stay sane, motivated in terms of dealing with those peaks and troughs?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. The first is I probably started my entrepreneurial journey with very little regard for what they now call mindfulness or meditation. As I've gotten older, maybe a tad bit wiser, I really, really see the value. I think that the whole lonely at the top comment is a real one. All of these sayings that people say, earlier in your life, you think, that's not going to be me. I'm going to surround myself with people that I love and this and that, and it's going to be great. At the end of the day, all these sayings are based in some level of truth. And I found that, turning to mindfulness and spending just a little bit of time every week meditating helps the very energetic human that I am to sort of, find a little peace and tranquility and really sort of refresh the thoughts. So I think that's probably one of them. I think the second is, admitting failure, admitting challenges, and not being afraid to do that. I think there is nothing worse than the withholding of those things. Now, I don't mean that every time I have an issue, I get on LinkedIn and write a post about it. No, but what I mean though is truthfulness, transparency in my communication with my employees and my customers, making sure that I've got mentors to turn to who I can share my biggest concerns with. And investing in meaningful, trusted relationships that are not transactional in nature. I think those for me are sort of the cornerstones of, survival in this game.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, listen, Simon, it's been great having you on. I've absolutely loved talking to you today, so appreciate your time. And look, best of luck to yourself. Best of luck to HYCU moving forward. I hope you guys continue to go from strength to strength.
Thank you, my friend. Great to be here.
Yeah. All right. Take care.